Hi, everybody. This is Robert Chadwick with America Mortgages. Thank you for joining us for another webinar. We're very excited to be joined today by Bobby Casey of Business Anywhere. If you're familiar with Business Anywhere, they are one of the premier companies that assist with setting up an LLC amongst other things. But for our purposes in this webinar, we'll be discussing what an LLC means, how to establish it, and the benefits of an LLC as a foreign investor or U.S. expat investor obtaining a mortgage or purchasing a property in the U.S. What Casey will cover will be a variety of things. After Casey presents, I will go over our normal standard process on how to obtain a mortgage as a foreign national and U.S. expat, and then we will have a question and answer session towards the end. So Casey, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Maybe you can introduce yourself and your company, and then we can go from there.
Well, thanks, Robert, for having me today. Also, I appreciate having the chance to talk to your audience. So, should be pretty interesting for anyone who is, well, it should be interesting for anyone interested in investing in real estate in the U.S., whether you are a U.S. citizen living abroad as an expat or maybe living nomadic, or if you are a non-U.S. person interested in investing into the U.S. market. So just a quick background about myself. I'm an international tax lawyer. I've been doing, predominantly what I've been doing for 20 plus years is tax, asset protection, and location consulting for location independent entrepreneurs around the world. And several years ago, we basically decided to build a software platform to automate a lot of things when it comes to company formation, company compliance, annual renewals, that sort of thing. And basically we spun it off as a company, and that's kind of how Business Anywhere got launched. And what we do, we are a registered agent and company formation service. We do company formation and registered agent in all 50 states in the US. We also do remote online notary. We do company compliance, and we have a virtual mailbox product for any of you looking for a mailing address in the U.S. Virtual mailbox is kind of a must-have thing for expats and permanent travelers. So I know I had to get one a long time ago when I moved out of the U.S., and it became kind of a necessary tool. So that's what we do. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about forming an LLC for your U.S. real estate investments. And as I said a little bit in the intro, this should be important for you if you are a U.S. citizen or U.S. person for tax purposes, like a green card holder, but living abroad as an expat or living kind of the digital nomad life. It should also be really relevant for you if you are a non-U.S. person investing in the U.S. And needing structures for that. I don't want to go into too much detail on real estate, but I am also a real estate investor, and I was raised in a construction and investing household. I started buying my first properties, I think, when I was 20 or 21. So I'm quite familiar with this. I've got thousands and thousands of clients in this space. So quite familiar with it, both from the tax consulting side and asset protection planning, and also now from the company structuring side. So certainly you're on this webinar because you are interested in investing in real estate. It is and can be a very lucrative opportunity. The U.S. is a place where you can get rich investing in real estate, a lot of it from the tax benefits you get and the ability to leverage capital to invest in more properties. It makes it very attractive, especially for foreign nationals who haven't been investing in the U.S. market in the past. Like if you're from Europe, it's very difficult to leverage properties against properties to get loans, or at least it's much more difficult than it is in the U.S. So it does make it a pretty lucrative opportunity if you are trying to increase your portfolio size and build your wealth in real estate. Forming a U.S. LLC does provide numerous advantages. I don't want to get into it on this slide too much. We're going to get into it in depth on next slides, but we will explore the reasons why an LLC for almost everyone is the optimal structure for your U.S. real estate investments. Next slide, please. So why register an LLC to buy U.S. property? In this slide, we're going to be talking about the legal framework, some ownership flexibility, and the credibility and professionalism of using an LLC for your real estate investments. So an LLC is a hybrid entity. It was in the US, it was first created back in the early 70s. Wyoming was the first state to implement an LLC. It was a hybrid structure. Basically, it's a hybrid, kind of a cross between a corporation and a partnership, which effectively gives you the best of both worlds. You get the liability protection from a corporation, while you get the simplicity and flexibility of operating a partnership. Having an LLC makes it really, really simple for you with all the flexibility of how you structure ownership, how you structure management, how you structure out payments to members and managers. And in an LLC, the owners are called members, just for clarity. In a corporation, it's shareholders. In an LLC, they're called members. For example, you might have a managing member who maybe only owns, if you have a partnership, you might have a managing member who maybe only contributed 10% to the equity of the investment. However, he or she might be getting a larger share of the profits because of their management role. Well, you have a lot of flexibility there because you can actually give in your partnership agreement, in your operating agreement, you can actually choose to give them a larger share of the profits to compensate for them for that. So it makes it really simple to have a lot of flexibility in the structure itself. The legal framework of an LLC makes it a lot simpler than dealing with corporations. For example, if you want to add a member to the LLC, you remove a member, you add a manager, remove a manager. It's really simple. You just do an amendment to the operating agreement. You might have to do a membership interest assignment if you're transferring ownership of that partnership or of that LLC to another person. But it's all paperwork that you do in the back end. Nothing really needs to be filed with the Secretary of State to do that. Whereas in some states, if you have a corporation, you have to record minutes on any changes you make. And oftentimes you even have to record the changes in the share structure with the Secretary of State, making it much more complicated, more costly to do that. So an LLC makes this super easy, super flexible. And then on the credibility and professionalism side, it's a little bit of an obvious point, but if I go buy a property, let's say I'm looking at a shopping center or an apartment building or something like that, let's say it's $1 million or $2 million, and I walk into the bank and I say, I want to borrow a property, or I want to borrow $1 million to buy this property. Me going in as Bobby has a lot less credibility than me going in as Bobby LLC. It just it shows an air of credibility and professionalism that banks are going to respect. It also makes it a lot easier for you to get credit lines, which in turn makes it easier for you to add leverage and more quickly grow your real estate portfolio. To me, it just makes you much more attractive to partners, lenders, even tenants. It just looks so much better. And we'll get into the liability issues in a second, but that can't be overstated. So in my opinion, this is probably the most important slide. So if you're not taking notes and you want to take a little bit of notes, this is the one you want to pay attention to. So having an LLC gives you tremendous asset protection benefits. So we're going to be talking about liability, limited liability, separation assets, and risk management. I have one more slide where we're going to be talking about risk mitigation. So we'll get to, that's a slightly separate topic we'll get to on that slide. In this one, we're going to stick with these three topics. But basically, having your properties in an LLC allows you to separate the ownership of the property from your personal assets. So for example, maybe you own some other things, like maybe you have a private business you own, maybe a house or two, an investment portfolio, your 401k, that sort of thing. And over here, you've got some real estate. Well, I can give you an example. I had a client come to me, I guess 3 or 4 years ago. He owned 10 rental houses in Texas. He owned them all in his own name, which, by the way, is a horrible, horrible, horrible decision. I can't stress that enough. Never own real estate in your own name. Every single human being that walks into your property is a potential liability that walks in there, and you have no control over it when it is a rental property. You don't know who your tenants are going to invite over, their friends, their family. In this example, my client came to me to help him fix a situation which we couldn't fix because it had already happened. But it illustrates the point. He owned 10 properties in his own name, and he actually had one of his tenants. This is like a tenant's worst nightmare, but he had one of the tenants in one of the houses actually built a meth lab in the kitchen, and they blew the house up or blew the kitchen up and killed somebody. Terrible situation. But because he didn't own any of his properties in an LLC, it exposed him personally to the entire liability. And he ended up losing everything because, as you can see here, number two, separation of assets. Not only did he not own his rental house in an LLC, but he owned all of his rental houses and his personal home in his own name. And by not separating the assets, he exposed everything he owned to that litigation event. So it was a horrible, horrible risk management plan to own everything in his own name. So just to kind of flip that and give you a better idea of what he should have done, what he should have done in that scenario was he should have had one LLC for each individual property. So property one, LLC one, property two, LLC two, property three, LLC three, so on and so forth. And in that scenario, what would have happened is, let's say property one was the one where somebody got killed. Property one would have been, all the liability would have been limited to the assets of property one, because the owner's family would have sued the owner of property one, which would have been LLC one. And then LLC one's assets would have been at risk. He certainly would lose that property. But properties 2 through 9, plus his personal residence and other assets, would have been completely separated. So he would have completely segregated those assets and limited his liability. So it is a huge thing. You absolutely have to own. I mean, if you're a serious real estate investor, you're crazy to buy property in your own name. Let's move forward to the next slide, because I get into this a bit deeper in the risk management. So I'm going to briefly hit on tax benefits. As I understood our previous conversation before the presentation began, you're going to have a pretty good presentation next week on tax benefits for real estate investment in the US. So I'm not going to hit too deep on this because you're going to have that webinar next week that's going to go into much more depth on that topic. But I just want to hit on these. We're just going to scratch the surface, hit on the high spot so you understand how LLCs work. An LLC by default, now you can choose a different tax selection, but for real estate, you really want the default tax status of an LLC, and that is pass-through. So if you're a single member LLC, that LLC is treated as a disregarded entity for tax purposes. And if, as you earn income from that LLC, that income will be on the Schedule C of your personal tax return. So if you're a U.S. person for tax purposes, you're going to file a 1040, and you'll have a Schedule C to reflect the income or loss. If you had a tax loss on there, it'll be on the Schedule C of your tax return. If you are a non-U.S. person, then you're going to file a 1040 NR. NR stands for non-resident, and it'll be on the Schedule C of your 1040 NR. But it passes directly through to your tax. So an LLC in this regard is tax neutral. You don't get any direct tax benefits of owning a property in an LLC. You don't avoid certain taxes in certain ways because it passes through to you, and the taxation is based on your personal situation. And as an owner of a property, let's say you own a 50-unit apartment building or some rental houses in Kansas or something like that, the taxation is going to be based on your personal tax situation and the location of those properties. So, but pass-through taxation is ideal because some people think, okay, maybe I should put my properties in a corporation. Well, that's not really ideal. Number one, A C corporation, which is the default status of a corporation, a C corporation is taxed at the federal level and at the state level if there's a state corporate tax. Currently, the federal corporate tax rate is 21%, and then state tax ranges anywhere from 0 up to, I think the highest now in the US is around 14%. So you would have state tax on the income of your property, and then if you paid yourself a dividend, you personally would have dividend tax on that. So you can end up with double taxation through a corporation, which is not ideal. And then some people also think they should do a S corp, which technically there is no such entity as an S corp. There is a corporation with an S tax election when you file IRS Form 2553 to elect a different tax status. But generally, that's not what you want in real estate. It is because then you end up having to get the tax advantages. You have to pay a salary and that sort of thing. So let's stick with LLCs, default tax election, whether you are an individual and it passes through to your Schedule C, or you are a partnership. So if you have 2 or more partners or members in the LLC, then you file a 1065 partnership return, and then each partner is issued a K-1 to reflect that profit or loss. Deductions and depreciations. Again, I'm sure your webinar next week is going to go into a lot of depth on deductions, and I'm sure they will discuss also accelerated depreciation schedules to cut your profit, especially in the first few years. The only thing I'll mention about taking these deductions through an LLC, one benefit of having it through an LLC is you can be considered a real estate professional now that it's run through a company, and you do get maximum advantage of taking these deductions. Whereas owning property individually, unless you can prove you are an actual real estate professional, you have limitations on some of the deductions you can take. And then state-specific tax advantages. There could be incentives and benefits depending on where you're investing in the property. And so there could be some advantages there depending on where you register the LLC. So we're going to get into mitigating litigation risk with an LLC. I have a couple of really key points we want to talk about on this slide. So starting out with legal safeguards, we talked a little bit about this with just having the liability protection, or that umbrella, so to speak, of having your properties held in an LLC, keeping it away from you. But there's also some additional legal safeguards. For example, generally speaking, for property ownership, we recommend Wyoming LLCs because they have some very clear statutes that do a great job of protecting the assets of single member LLCs particularly. I don't want to get into too much detail. We could do an entire presentation exactly on that one topic. But if you want to look this up, just Google search charging order protection Wyoming, and there's unlimited blogs. We probably have a blog on our website about that as well. But there's unlimited blogs where you can read about charging order protection in Wyoming particularly. It's safe to say there's actually only one other state that has the same level of legal safeguards as Wyoming for single member LLCs. One other quick note I will mention, because a lot of people seem to think Florida LLCs are really ideal structures here as well, especially non-US people. For whatever reason, Florida seems to be, I don't know, maybe somebody wrote some blogs about Florida being great. I want to make a quick point. If you are doing a single member LLC for investing in real estate, I highly, highly encourage you to not use Florida LLCs, because Florida has a lot of case history with single member LLCs. They will bypass the entity itself. Like if you personally get sued, they can actually take the assets within the LLC to satisfy a judgment. Wyoming, you can't do that. Florida, you can. Now, Florida, if you have multiple members, 2 or more members, no problem with Florida. But for single member LLCs, I generally avoid Florida. Insurance considerations. I get a lot of pushback on the asset protection benefits of LLCs because people say, well, Bobby, why don't you just have liability insurance to cover everything? Then you don't really have to worry about all these entity structures and complex planning and risk mitigation and all that. Well, my answer to that is go read an insurance contract and go read the fine print. And when you read the hundreds of loopholes in there, you'll realize that an insurance adjuster's entire job is to not pay out on your claim. That is literally their job, is to find a loophole in the fine print of an insurance contract and rewrite those contracts for future use to create loopholes that give them ways of not paying on your claim. So, for example, the example I gave earlier with the guy that had 10 properties in Texas, they did not pay out on his claim because selling meth from a residential property is an illegal activity. And they had a loophole in there that said they do not cover risks associated with illegal activity in the property. Of course, like most of us, we don't read line by line on these contracts and we just think, oh, well, I'll just make the claim and it'll be fine. I'm just saying it's not a great idea to rest solely on your insurance to protect you from any litigation risk. Having that LLC in place that shields you and your personal assets and also shields that property from your other properties is a tremendous benefit. And I look at it a little bit also like an insurance policy because, I mean, you're going to pay every year to maintain it, but it's going to be cheaper than a liability insurance policy that's going to cover you for a wrongful death case. And lastly, on this risk mitigation slide, we'll discuss the operating agreement. For those of you not familiar, an operating agreement, kind of in layman terms, is effectively, it's the contract between you and your own business. It basically spells out the guidelines, how to make decisions, when you make certain decisions, how to deal with disputes. It also deals with how to prevent conflicts between members, what management roles are, what members' roles are, what happens if members have a personal lawsuit and you have a creditor coming after a member's interest in an LLC. So having a properly drafted operating agreement with asset protection in mind is critically important, especially if you're holding valuable assets in that entity. And this will be our last slide here before my contact information. So I'm wrapping this up. So optimizing the structure of your real estate investments. We'll be discussing strategic planning, multi-entity strategy, and professional guidance here. And these it all kind of goes together here, but effectively, I'll just give you some ideas. I briefly hit on it before, but if you're buying properties, generally speaking, you want to have one property, one LLC. Now, I get some pushback here from people, maybe somebody's buying low value houses for $50,000 a piece in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky. I get it. It's, spending all that money on an LLC and maintaining it every year for one low value property that rents for, let's say, $500 a month, starts to get a bit tedious. If you are in that scenario where you're buying lower value properties, I mean, from a liability standpoint, you should always have one property, one LLC. But from a cost saving standpoint, you could, maybe group them together, 2, maybe 3 properties into one LLC just for cost savings. But again, just understand if you have 3 rental houses in one LLC and you have a litigation event with one of those properties, you have now exposed all 3 of those properties to that liability. And if you are hit with a judgment, they can come after all 3 of those properties. Now, if you had 30 properties and 10 LLCs, you have now segregated that risk and separated those 3 from the other 27 properties. So it's still an effective strategy, but just for cost minimization, if you're in low value properties like that, maybe you want to consider that. So that's one strategy to consider. Another thing to consider is a lot of people say, won't it be like so complicated if I've got 10 properties with 10 LLCs, I file my taxes, I've got 10 items on my Schedule C, it's just so much. One thing you can do to kind of minimize that is you create one LLC as your holdco, and then holdco will be the owner or the sole member of LLC 1, LLC 2, LLC 3 down the line. And that way, all the income or loss, if you have a tax loss, all of it flows through to holdco, and then you only have the income or loss from holdco ending up on your personal income tax return. So it does simplify that a little bit. Yes, you do add one additional entity there, but some people like having the holding company in place because it also allows them to more freely move money across properties. So they can move money up. Let's say you sell property 5. So property 5 sells, the funds flow up to LLC 5, and then you flow the the money up to Holdco, and then Holdco can redeploy that and invest it into a new property. So that is one strategy if you have multiple properties. Another strategy, let me hit on this topic real quick. I briefly hit on it before. I generally recommend anytime you're holding or any real estate, I'm sorry, if you're owning real estate, to own it in a Wyoming LLC. Again, you can do other LLCs. I have no skin in the game. I could care less which state you pick, but generally speaking, Wyoming has better statutes for asset protection and a very long history. They are the first state that created LLCs, and it's a very pro-business friendly state. So they have a lot of history and statutes protecting the assets in an LLC. Now, a lot of pushback I do get. So if you go talk to your CPA or maybe your local business attorney or your local family attorney, they might say, for example, let's say you live in South Carolina, and they might tell you, well, sorry, but you need to register your LLC in South Carolina. That is absolutely not true unless the business has operating activity in South Carolina. And what I mean by that, if you just own, let's say you just own an apartment building, that building can be owned by an LLC literally in any state, Wyoming or otherwise, any other state, actually any other country. We could register a BVI company for you to own that property in South Carolina if you wanted. It doesn't matter the ownership of it. What matters is the operational activity in the state. So an example of this would be if you owned an apartment building. Let's say you owned a large apartment building with 500 units, and with that, of course, you're going to have some operating activity. You're going to have on-site property management. You're going to have a handyman or more than one, grounds maintenance, plumbers, all this stuff. So you're going to have employees to manage that property. Well, if you have employees, you end up having what's called nexus in that state. So you will need to be registered in the state where those employees live. However, the strategy I would employ would be to own the property itself in a Wyoming LLC. And in this scenario, just as an example, then I would register a South Carolina LLC to serve as the property management business. And that's the company that hires your property management, your groundskeepers, and so on and so forth. So that would be the strategy I would employ. And the same could be said if you own, let's say, 20 rental houses and you decided to manage your own properties. I would create an in-state LLC for the property management function, but I would have each of those properties owned by a Wyoming LLC. Okay, I hope that's clear. And then professional guidance. You always want to get professional guidance from, your real estate attorneys, your CPAs, investment advisors, that sort of thing. It is important for your structure. So with that, I am done. You can hit the next slide, which is just my contact details. Actually, it's just kind of our advertisement, I guess. But just quickly, I mentioned it in the intro. We do company formation in all 50 states, registered agent service, virtual mailbox. We do all of your company compliance. We're the only registered agent and company formation service out there that automates your annual report filings every year. As long as you're a client in good standing with us, your things get filed automatically every year. I don't know if any of you've had LLCs before where you've gotten the notice and missed it, or the email went into your spam or whatever, and then you realize 3 months later your LLC is in default status and you have late fees and reinstatement fees and that sort of thing. So that doesn't happen with us because it's automated. So if you need any help with that sort of thing, let us know. And then I guess that's my advertisement slide. So let me know if we can help you guys.
Bobby, super, super interesting stuff. And I'll say, as a real estate investor myself, I honestly was not aware that you could have an LLC in a separate state to where the property is owned. So I think
almost nobody knows that, to be honest.
Yeah.
And most people get really bad advice on that. They go to their local business attorney or their local CPA. And because that lawyer, we'll use South Carolina as an example, because that lawyer is in South Carolina, that's what he knows. So lawyers, CPAs are the most conservative people on the planet, and they give the narrowest advice they can with only the things they know. And so that's why you get that type of advice from a CPA in South Carolina or a lawyer in South Carolina. But that's not accurate. It's only about where the operational activity happens, and almost nobody understands that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll personally say I did not understand it as well, and I've been doing real estate for 20 plus years. One more question. What's the cost to establish an LLC?
So we have various options on our website. It depends on what you need done. I mean, the basic fee, we charge $37 plus the state fee to register an LLC, the state fee and whatever that state is. But then there's various options on top of that if you want us to do certain things. Do you want us to do your EIN application and file your SS4? Do you want us to file your 2553? Do you want us to draft a custom operating agreement for you, and so on and so forth? So it can range anywhere from 37 plus the state fees up to a few $100.
Okay, so
I think,
quite
and
reasonable.
it depends on the state, because some states have really expensive fees too. Like Delaware is quite expensive, California is quite expensive. So it depends on the state fees a lot.
So you had brought up something as well, the EIN number. Obviously there's a lot of people that will establish an LLC for the purpose of purchasing a property, but they have to wait for that EIN number to be established. Is there any way to speed that along, or how long does that take? Or, do you have any insight on this? I know you're dealing with the IRS, but it'd be good to have some professional advice on it.
This is probably the sorest spot in our company is EIN applications for non-US people. If you're a US person and you have a social security number, we can get your EIN unless there's an issue, which rarely there is, but occasionally it happens. But if you have a social security number, we usually get EIN number same day or next day. It's usually quite fast. If you are a non-US person and do not have a social security number, it is an extremely tedious process. I can tell you, unless you've done 1,000 of these things, it is not something you want to do yourself, because it's a paper form that you have to do, and you have to either mail it in or fax it into the IRS. There are multiple things on that form that you can answer incorrectly. And the worst thing is if you miss a checkbox, or you don't answer the right thing in the right box in the right way, and then you fax it over to the IRS won't answer you. They won't do anything about it. And you might think, okay, I've got to wait 4 weeks for this EIN to come back to me, but you will literally never hear from the IRS. They're never going to respond to you and tell you you made a mistake on the form. They just see the mistake and they're like, it's wrong. They throw it away. It is the wildest thing ever. I bet in all the years I've been doing this, I think maybe we've gotten a letter back from the IRS less than 10 times telling us there was a mistake and to refile it. Less than 10 times. I can tell you that is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of the SS4 forms we filed. So right now, generally speaking, it's taking us about 2 weeks to get the EIN letter back from the IRS. It can take up to 12 weeks. I can also tell you, be very glad you were not doing this a couple of years ago in, let's call it peak COVID, because during that time, basically, they closed the office for about 6 months that did EIN applications. And by closed it, I mean, they literally sent everybody home and nobody worked for 6 months. And so it did not happen for non-US people. It didn't happen for 6 months. And when they came back to work, they had such a backlog, it took 6 to 8 months to get one done back then. This was back in 2020 and 21. 22, it started getting a little bit better, and then progressively it's gotten a little bit better. Now we're down to, on average, 2 to 3 weeks to get them back. So if you're a non-US person creating an LLC and you know you need that EIN, plan ahead. And I mean, plan ahead as much as you can. Generally speaking, if you know you've got a deal to be made and you're purchasing the property, you don't necessarily need the EIN to make the deal. You need the EIN to open the bank account to eventually get paid money into your account. But you can do that as you progress. I wouldn't throw a deal away just because I'm waiting on my EIN. I would basically just ask, or figure out other ways, or take checks or something like that and just hold the money in that way until the EIN is issued, because you can't open a bank account without an EIN in the US. And for those listening that don't know, EIN stands for Employer Identification Number. That is the tax ID number for your LLC.
Actually, I'll say if you can get these within 2 to 3 weeks, that's fantastic. Certainly will be.
It's not Yeah, it's not always like that. I mean, we've literally done this. It's crazy. We've literally sent in, like for example, we might send in 10 or 15 SS4s or EIN applications in one day and at the same time in the same fax, right? And then we'll get one of them back a week later. We'll get one back 2 weeks later. We'll get three more back 2.5 weeks later. We'll get a couple more back in 4 weeks. I'm talking the same batch. We send them in the same batch, and they never come back at the same time frame, which is wild to me because I know with the IRS, the way their faxing system works, it's kind of like a support ticket. When they receive a fax, in that one fax, it creates a support ticket for an IRS agent that deals with that issue, but that one ticket goes to one agent. So that one fax comes in, let's say with 12 applications in it, it goes to one person. But why that one person doesn't do all 12 of them at one time, you've got me. The
Government
IRS
efficiency.
has no logic. Yeah.
Yeah, government efficiency, right?
Yeah, we actually got a bad review on one of the Trustpilot or Google or something like that. We got a bad review because it took the guy 8 weeks to get his EIN back, and he thought it was us. He wrote us a scathing. Everything happened on our end in perfect timing, but the EIN took 8 weeks to get back, and he wrote us a really 1-star scathing review. As if we can control what the IRS does. But whatever, it's the nature of the business. It doesn't always go perfect.
Okay, so I will start my my presentation now, and then after the presentation, I'm sure everybody has a lot of questions for Bobby as
Sure.
well as I do. And then if you could, I can see there's already 17 questions in the Q&A, but you can start loading your questions up, and we'll hit them as we go. So
Okay.
with that, I shall start. Okay, so as everybody is aware, we are a global mortgage provider. We focus primarily on providing U.S. mortgages for foreign nationals and expats. We are by far the industry leader in this, and because 100% of our clients are either foreign nationals or U.S. expats, I honestly feel, and I've been doing this for a very, very long time, that nobody does this type of lending better. So before I start, in the chat, you'll see a link to arrange an appointment or a time with either one of our loan officers. And our loan officers, as we'll go through the slides, are based all over the world and speak a variety of languages. You can click on it and you can schedule an appointment. And there's also a link if you'd like to schedule an appointment with Bobby and his team and discuss how you can benefit from an LLC. So the general overview for our U.S. mortgages, no U.S. credit is required. I know a lot of people have this idea, especially if you're an international investor, maybe you're investing in the UK or even Australia. A lot of times they want you to have some exposure in those countries. In the US, there is no requirement. It's fantastic if you have a credit report from your home country, but we're also aware that there are some countries that do not have a credit reporting agency, and that is something that we can work around as well. We do a lot of work with private banks. And private banks, as most of you are aware, normally, if they're able to give you a U.S. mortgage, which is very rare in general, but they will require you to put up AUM, or assets under management. All of our loans that we offer are considered dry funding, meaning there is no requirement to open up a bank account with that particular lender or that finance company that we work with, or even ourselves. We are a direct lender in the US. Foreign income is allowed. So if you're earning your money in Thai baht or euros or whatever it may be, that is not an issue with us. We have loan programs in all 50 states. If you're a foreign national, you can get up to 75% loan to value. If you are a U.S. expat, you can get up to 80% loan to value. And that's on a purchase. If you are looking to refinance, then it's just reduced slightly to 70%. We have a very simple process, and we have a really fantastic platform that allows you to take the application and securely upload all your documents. Normally, once we receive everything, give us about 72 hours to issue you a pre-approval. Or if you have the complete package, say it's either a refinance or if you have a purchase agreement, it takes us about 72 hours to get an actual conditional loan approval, which is, if you're familiar with US lending, this is lightning fast. Normal closing times is 30 to 45 days, which is very standard in the US. We factor on the extra time depending on where you're located, but normally we can do a transaction very, very quickly. One of again, the fantastic things about America Mortgages, because we only focus on foreign nationals and expats, you can sign your loan documents in the country that you are located. There is no need or no reason, unless you particularly want to pick up the keys for your house, to travel to the US. And there's a variety of ways to sign, whether it's on a video call or going to the embassy. It really just depends on what works best for you. And in most countries, we're already, as soon as we start talking to you, we're already aware of how you will sign your closing documents. Our loans are available for purchase, refinance, and cash out or / equity release. So anything that you want to do real estate related, we certainly can do it. And this goes for both residential all the way up to commercial. One thing that is very, very unique for the US is there is no discrimination when it comes to age of the borrower to obtain a mortgage, meaning whether you're 19 or 99, you are still able to obtain the longest amortization period available. So if you're 19 or 99, you still have a 30-year fixed mortgage. There's no discrimination against it. So it's an amazing way, especially if you're a global real estate investor, to be able to maximize your yield with the longest amortization possible. And in order to help you maximize your yield, we actually have a program that is a 10-year fixed interest only. And then after that 10-year period, you would expect that loan to readjust to whatever the prevailing rate is at that time. However, that loan rate stays at the same rate, but now you're just paying principal and interest. So you have a total of a 40-year tenure. If you want to be able to get maximum yield, that's the loan that you want to go for. A lot of our loans are based on common sense underwriting. And I'll go through this as we go through the loan programs, but we can qualify a loan based on the rental income of the property. And if you think about it, it absolutely makes sense, because why would you, if you're going to buy a building, for example, you're certainly not going to qualify on your personal income. You're going to qualify on the cash flow of the property. And that's how we look at the individual rental properties. We qualify them on the cash flow of the property. It just makes sense. 97% of our loan applications are approved, something we are very, very proud of. And we have loan officers in 12 different countries working 24/7. So regardless of where you are in the world, you do not have to stay up at 3 in the morning to talk to some loan officer in New York. You are working on your time zone and often speaking your language. So I'll go over our loan programs quite quickly. And if there are questions, you can drop them into the chat and we can go forward from there. So this is by far our most popular loan program. This is called the AM Rental Coverage Plus. With this, there is no personal income required, meaning you do not have to provide your tax returns, your end-of-year statement, etc. Because we're doing loans across the world, from Shanghai to Sydney to anywhere, if we had to go through tax returns, it would be an administrative and an underwriting nightmare. So what we do is, as I explained earlier, we qualify the property or the borrower on the income generated from the property. And if you look at the bottom, you can see the example of this. So as an example, if the income is $2,400, and how we get that amount or that number is when we order the appraisal or the valuation, we request an appraisal or valuation on the rent. And that number is the number that is used to qualify for the loan. So when we say the mortgage payment, we're talking about the total mortgage payment, which is the taxes, the insurance, and then the mortgage payment. Sometimes we can adjust it based on a principal and interest, or sometimes it can be an interest only. But those three things together make up your mortgage payment. And as long as the rent covers that, then the loan qualifies. And just as an example, if for say the rent does not cover the full amount, it does not mean that the loan is not approved. All it means is the LTV will be reduced slightly. So it's a fantastic way to do it. We can go down this, that we need to adjust this slide because we had just lowered our loan amount to $100,000 with a 75% loan to value. What that means, and Bobby had sort of talked about this a little bit earlier, literally anybody can build a portfolio in the US, and by far it is absolutely the best way to create wealth. 30-year fixed, again, regardless of age, and interest-only programs available. This is a very popular loan program, especially if you have students, you have children that are going to school abroad in the US. A lot of times, or previously up until this program, you would have to qualify based on your income, your personal income, and you would have to be able to service your debt in your home country, as well as servicing the debt in the US where your child was living, and you would purchase the property as a second home. Often, especially if maybe you were self-employed and you're not showing your true debt serviceability, it was difficult. So this program allows you to qualify just as our rental coverage loan qualifies. So you qualify on the rental income of the property, even though your child will be attending in university and living in that property while going to school. It's a fantastic way to do it. And if the child is 18, which is most likely the case, we can add them onto the loan, which will help them build some US credit. The AM Investor Plus, this is if you are wanting, if say, for example, the rents do not cover the mortgage payment for whatever reason. Maybe you're buying something that you're expecting some real capital appreciation, or maybe it's a place that you've always wanted to buy a property. There could be a variety of reasons. In the event that, say, the rent doesn't qualify, it doesn't mean that you cannot get the loan. We have a loan program that will qualify on your personal income. And again, because we're doing loans around the world, we realize if we were to take tax returns, it would be unreasonable. So how we qualify, and we have a template for this, is you will qualify on 2 years of income in your current year to date in a letter. And that letter, if you're self-employed, will be from your accountant. If you're employed, it's going to be from your employer. Very simple, very easy to get, and it works exactly as the same of providing all of your income. And I know most of you are probably watching this and thinking, why don't they have this where I live? And I think you will find that this is absolutely the easiest and the simplest type of mortgage to get. Again, you qualify on that. Loan amounts as low as $100,000, 30-year fixed, interest only, up to 75% financing for foreigners. How this works, if you look on the bottom, so we would take whatever is listed in your letter, your gross personal income, and we need to have that at least at a 43% debt to income ratio. And the debt to income ratio is calculated only on the debt in the US. So if you're a global investor, most likely you will have only the mortgage for the property. If you are a US expat and say you've gone to one of the big banks, you get halfway through the process and then they say, oh, you're earning your dollars in euros or pounds or whatever it may be. I'm sorry, we can't help you. We probably get 1/3 of our business this way. They're going almost all the way through the transaction. They get to say the third week, and then this comes out. And then, they come to us and scramble. What we try to do as a US expat is make the loan process just like you were living and working in the US. except you do not need a W-2, and foreign income is absolutely allowed. So you would qualify just as you were living and working in the US and walking into a local bank. Certainly, you still need to have maintain US credit and have a good credit score. And again, loan amounts on this particular loan program is at $150,000 up. If you look at how this qualifies, as we take your 2 years of tax returns and debt in the US, and we again have to come to at least a 43% debt to income ratio. So high net worth clients, we deal a lot globally with private banks. We realize that a lot of high net worth individuals have very complicated tax returns, multiple jurisdictions, various businesses. Maybe they don't show exactly what they can service in debt. So we have a program that qualifies them on their assets, their liquid assets, not their hard assets. So if it's like cash, it could be even crypto, bonds, stocks, these types of things. We will take 2 months of these statements and we will use the average of that based on the fixed portion of the loan. And if you look below, this is a very easy way to explain this. So if you take a portfolio of, say, $5 million and the fixed period of the loan, even though amortized over 30, but the fixed period is, say, for 5 years. So we'll divide that $5 million over 60 months, which is 5 years, and we'll come up with an average income, and that would be used to qualify. So as you can see in this case, it's not a very large portfolio, but it's significant, but it gives the client or the borrower $80,000 or a little above income to qualify for the mortgage. So that's the entire presentation. This is our contact information. This is a scan code that makes it easier. We have loan officers all over the world. There is a link in the chat where you can schedule an appointment to speak to one of our loan officers, or you can schedule an appointment to speak with Bobby Casey and his team. So with that, we will start the question and answers. Okay, so what I'll do is I will read the questions out, and then if it's for you, I'll ask you to answer it if it's for me, and then there may even be some that both of us are answering.
Okay.
So the first question, can you help with opening bank accounts for an LLC? I believe that'd be you.
Yeah, we actually do have one of our banking partners. It's a online bank, and you can actually open it right there in the platform. And they do accept foreign nationals.
That's fantastic, because I think, as you're likely aware, foreigners setting up U.S. bank accounts is often not an easy feat.
It's not easy. It's doable, but like if you want a brick and mortar account like Wells Fargo or Bank of America, foreign nationals can do it. They just have to come up here in person at the bank. We have an online bank platform that they don't have to appear in person. It's all done and verified online. So.
Okay, and before we finish the questions, I was a little bit incorrect when I was talking about the link in the chat. The link in the chat for Bobby, you can actually set up an LLC right on that link. So I guess it's using your platform. So fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, can an LLC be owned by an offshore SPV like a BVI or a UK co to purchase property? I'll let you answer this, and then I'll talk about the mortgage portion of that.
So yeah, I can't answer from the mortgage side if it's a viable option, but there's zero limitation on who can own a U.S. LLC. So yes, a BVI limited company or SPC can own it. No problem.
So I think for us, and we actually get this question often because I believe tax advisors in home countries often want to use a tax blocker. Unfortunately, for a mortgage, the members of the LLC or member of the LLC needs to be also the borrower for the property. So if there is another entity that's owning the LLC, unfortunately, it does not work for a mortgage. Next question. What state is the best state for an LLC for real estate investment? I'm going to take a guess on this one, but I'm going to say Wyoming.
Nailed it. Yep. Yep. Definitely Wyoming. I was just going to make one comparison because I get this question a lot. Why not Delaware, right? Like, because Delaware is always a common question for LLCs. And I'll make a few comments about Delaware. In 95% of the cases, Delaware is generally not a good option, especially in this scenario. It's not a good option. Delaware is a good option if you're raising money or you need to go get large credit lines, or you're dealing like with large funding sources, 7, 8, 9-figure funding sources, because Delaware has its own court system called the Chancery Court System, which deals exclusively with business disputes. And because they have that court system, it makes it more attractive to investors like VCs or large funding sources. It makes it attractive to the people giving you money, because if you ever default on your loan, it's easier for them to take you to court in Delaware. So if you are one of those people that needs to raise large sums of money for your project, then yes, maybe Delaware might make sense. Otherwise, avoid Delaware because it is a hassle. They're expensive. They take forever to get done. For example, Delaware, we by default do, when we register Delaware LLCs, we only do them with expedited filings, because a standard filing in Delaware takes 2 to 4 weeks. Nobody wants to wait 2 to 4 weeks for the state to do anything. That's not exactly a clear picture of how long it takes to get a Delaware LLC created, because even though we do expedited filing, it's done within 24 hours, assuming no problems and there's no issues with the name or whatever. It happens within 24 hours. The issue is Delaware doesn't give you those documents electronically. They mail them to you, and they use, I don't know how they do it, but they use the slowest process possible on earth to mail them to you. I think they use carrier pigeons or something, but it takes 2 to 3 weeks before we get that document in our hand and upload it into your dashboard so that you have your documents. So even though it's technically formed in one day, you can't do anything with it for 2 to 3 weeks, because you can't do anything without your filing documents. And also, Delaware is expensive. If you are even 1 day late on renewing your entity and filing your annual report, it's a $200 fine. Like, there's all kinds of problems with Delaware. So I avoid Delaware unless you are going after those larger funding sources or investors.
Super interesting. Okay, next question. In my very recent experience, lenders do not want to provide HELOCs on properties owned by LLCs. I had to transfer into my personal name. Any suggestions on how to secure a HELOC with an LLC? Unfortunately, we do not provide HELOC loans for our clients. So I wouldn't be able to answer that. Bobby, I don't know if you have any feedback on this, on a I guess tax or legal basis.
I'm not a professional in the lending business. I can tell you I've seen lenders that do HELOCs on property, like commercial, like, well, they call it a commercial loan because it's in an LLC's name. I mean, it could be a single family home in an LLC, but they consider it a commercial loan. I have seen lenders that do that, so it is possible, but that's not my area of expertise. I couldn't even tell you the name of a lender that does that, but I've seen it.
Okay, perfect. Can a non-US resident register an LLC in the US? Do I need to visit the US to do that?
Yes and no. Anybody from a non-sanctioned country can register an LLC in the US. That is a very small list of sanctioned countries where we cannot register a company for you. Like, for example, right now, Russia is a sanctioned country, but we can still register LLCs for Russians if they have a residential address outside of Russia. So we register LLCs for Russians all the time that live in places like Dubai or Singapore or Thailand, or, I mean, there's tons of Russians, Turkey, that live there. And as long as they have an address outside of Russia, no problem. So it's not necessarily about the person itself in that scenario. It's about where they live. There's really no issue, and there's no need to appear in person. Everything's done electronically. You mentioned we have our link. I guess it's up in the chat or on your site. I'm not exactly sure where it is, but Anybody literally can go through that process and fill in the blanks. It takes like, even if you went through and watched all of our videos and did every single step and watched every single video in our process, I mean, it might take you 20 minutes to register your company.
Can I own multiple properties in an LLC, in one LLC? I believe you talked about that a little bit, but yeah.
The answer is yes, you can. It's just really not a good idea, like we discussed in the slide. You're just aggregating that risk under one LLC and exposing everything to one litigation event right there.
Okay, any complications on transferring individual ownership to an LLC, for instance, with existing mortgage? So, for the mortgage,
Okay.
shouldn't be an issue, but I mean, I don't know if it is with an LLC being an issue.
You mean, like, if I understand the question correctly, it's as if I own a property deeded into my name. Can I transfer that property into an LLC?
That seems to be what the question is, yeah.
Okay, so from a legal standpoint, no problem at all. You just go file a quitclaim deed and deed the property over from your name into the LLC's name. Super easy to do. We drafted quitclaim deeds for people all the time. For people that don't know the difference, a general warranty deed and a quitclaim deed are different things. For example, if I'm buying a house from Robert, I don't want to do a quitclaim deed because I want to make sure the title research was done and there's no unforeseen liabilities on there. So I wouldn't do a quitclaim deed because that kind of foregoes that process. I would want to buy it using a general warranty deed. But if I'm transferring it from my name to an LLC that I own, a quitclaim deed is cheap and easy to do, and I'm not concerned about any any other liabilities on the property because it went from me to me. So I would just file a quitclaim deed. Now, with that said, I can't answer about your mortgage company. Some mortgage companies have what's called due on sale clauses, where if you change ownership of the property from your name into a company, they might restrict that. You'd have to look at your mortgage lender to see if they had due on sale clauses. Even the lenders I've seen that had due on sale clauses generally don't really care anyway, as long as you keep paying your mortgage, because all they really care about is they get their mortgage payment. They already have first position, or I guess technically second behind your property tax. But other than that, they generally have first position on your property anyway. And they have a personal guarantee from you. So they don't really care who owns it at that point. But you might want to look at, if you're with a different lender, you might want to look to see if there's a due on sale clause in your mortgage contract.
Okay, next question. Do you need to buy a property in the same state your LLC is registered in? Or are there advantages to doing so? So I think this is something that we talked about even before the presentation, but if you want to touch on it quickly again.
Yeah, basically, as I mentioned before, generally speaking, for properties, because you have a significant asset and the protections of a Wyoming LLC, I generally recommend for owning real estate to have that property in a Wyoming LLC. You can absolutely own property in a different state in a Wyoming LLC. No problem. We do it all the time. I've personally done it with dozens of properties where I've owned properties in different states in a Wyoming LLC. Nope. I just did one in California the other day, like 2 weeks ago. Zero problem whatsoever. Again, the issue is, do you have operational activity in that business? Meaning, do you have like an office or employees and that sort of thing? Because if you have employees, you need a state tax ID number in that state. You need a company registered to do business in that state because you got to withhold payroll tax on them. And you basically need to do it. And that's the whole point of segregating that asset. A little bit off topic, but still kind of sort of in this topic. I also recommend holding basically any of your valuable assets in an LLC. Like personally, I own my investment portfolio in an LLC. I don't even have a brokerage account in my own name. I would never hold any valuable asset in my own name. Like I don't even own cars in my own name.
So, okay, next question. If I have one building with 4 units, should I create 4 separate LLCs?
So, well, I guess that depends on what you mean by 4 units. Is this like, so since we can't go back and forth with the person asking the query, if it's an apartment, like a fourplex with 4 like units in one deeded property, then you would do one LLC to own that one deeded property. But if you're talking about you on a condo building that has 4 separate deeded units, then I would probably, if you can, and if they're valuable enough, I would put each one in a separate LLC. I hope that's clear.
If you already created an LLC in a different state, can you switch it to Wyoming?
You can, yeah. Why you can domesticate an LLC into Wyoming. It costs a little bit more. Like we do this fairly often, but it costs a little bit more. By the way, we do this fairly often, but it's not on our website. You would have to send us an email for that. It costs a little bit more because we have to contact your home state. Let's say you had a South Carolina LLC. We would have to contact the South Carolina Secretary of State and get a certified copy of your articles of organization. And then there's some costs associated with that and FedEx fees and blah, blah, blah. So there's some additional costs to that and then we have to file the articles of domestication in the state of Wyoming. So it is doable. It's a little bit of a process, takes a little bit of time. It's not nearly as quick as just filing a new one. So you'd have to think about that. Like if it were me, and let's say I had an older South Carolina LLC that's been dormant and I haven't used in a long time, and now I'm going to go buy a property. Honestly, it's just easier to file a new LLC than to move that existing one, unless you had maybe some credit lines or some loans out or something like that with some history associated with that LLC. If you have that, then yeah, it makes sense to domesticate it and keep that LLC history.
Okay. Next question. Difference between a Wyoming and a Delaware LLC for owning real estate. I think you covered that a little bit.
I just hit that a minute ago. Yeah, Delaware is generally not a good idea just because of the complications, unless you're raising large funding sources. Wyoming, much easier, much cheaper, much simpler. It'll create less headaches for you. It's done quicker. So when we file Wyoming LLCs, we usually, with us, you have an expedited choice, but with us, once we do the filing, it's one day to get it done. And it's an electronic delivery. Whereas Delaware, it's one day, but then it's a paper delivery that takes 2 to 3 weeks to show up. So I don't really see any advantage for real estate using Delaware, like I said, other than raising large funding sources.
Next question. I am from the UK and I set up a California LLC, which holds the property. I want to add another property. Should I set up a new LLC per property? I believe yes, but
yes. So first of all, I'm going to make the assumption that the property is in California, because otherwise that is just crazy to register a property an LLC in California. And in fact, you can have that California property owned by a Wyoming LLC. Now, the one complication with California is if it is an income producing property, you're going to have to recognize that income and pay a California state tax return. In that scenario, it could make your life a little easier to have that LLC registered in California. Now, keep in mind, California is an anomaly. They're literally the only state that creates this problem of all 50 states. California is the only one that does that. So if you have investment property in California and you're recognizing the income in that California LLC, then it's probably better to have the property in California. It's expensive. You got to pay that $800 a year franchise tax plus the annual report fees and everything. But if you don't, they're going to hit you with some fines and penalties if you have income as that property. So anyway, it's a complicated issue with California. If you are buying a second property, my recommendation is create a second LLC. You could create a Wyoming LLC to own the property if you want, but if you're recognizing direct income in the property that's located in California, you probably want to do a California LLC. I will add one caveat to that. If you are interested in privacy, because I didn't even discuss privacy in the presentation, but a lot of people are interested in that. Some states like Wyoming and a few others, Delaware is another one, you can register an LLC without disclosing the members or managers' names with the Secretary of State, meaning your personal information is nowhere in public record. If you do it correctly, let me clarify, if you know what you're doing and it's done correctly, your information is nowhere in public record. And so what we just did actually with another client 2 weeks ago is we created a Wyoming LLC to buy the property in California because she did not want her name in public record in California as owning that property. And if we registered a California LLC, her name would be in public record because you can't file an LLC in California without giving a human's name associated with the entity. So what we did is we created a Wyoming LLC and registered it to do business in the state of California, keeping her name out of public record. So that could be an option for you too, if you are interested in privacy.
Okay, next question. Can you recommend a tax advisor who can advise on how owning US LLCs impact foreign tax reporting? So for us, I mean, we just like with Bobby, we have partners that specialize in specific areas, and we do have a partner, and coincidentally, next Thursday, the 13th of June, at 6 p.m., we will be having a webinar with him as well, so you can get some information on that. But Bobby, I'm not sure if that's part of your LLC process, if you assist with the taxes or not.
We do not. Actually, what I was going to say, I am an international tax lawyer, but I don't do tax filings. We don't touch any of that stuff. In my consulting business, outside of this, like with my tax consulting clients, we do advise them on structure and how to optimize for tax, but we don't do tax filings. So even in that scenario, I would hand them off to another CPA that could deal with the structure we implemented for the client. So what I was actually going to say, if you asked me, I would say join your webinar next week.
Thanks. Yeah, actually, the webinar next week, it's another guy as interesting as yourself, but this guy just focuses on doing taxes, U.S. taxes for foreign nationals and expats. That's his entire business. So yeah, so next Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Singapore time, you can sign up on the link below as well in the chat. Next question, does anyone have to file in both tax jurisdictions? Place of the LLC and place of the property. Example, Wyoming LLC with a Manhattan apartment needs to file in both Wyoming and New York because of costs, obviously.
File taxes was the question about filing taxes, or?
Yeah, so I think it's basically the way I'm reading it is if I own a property in New York that's owned by a Wyoming LLC, am I going to get doubly taxed? Am I going to have to file in both states?
Tax filings. Okay. No, you would not. You would only file in New York where the property is located. So remember, an LLC is a pass-through entity. It is completely tax neutral. The taxation is going to be based on the income generation itself. And in that scenario, if you own a Fifth Avenue property in Manhattan and you own it in a Wyoming LLC's name, no problem owning, but your taxes will be federal in New York State. And you wouldn't file anything in Wyoming because you don't have any assets in Wyoming.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Well, and also Wyoming doesn't have a state tax, so that's kind of a moot point because even if they did have a state tax, like even if you were in even if you had an Illinois LLC that owned a New York property, you still wouldn't file an Illinois state tax return on that property because there's no income generation that happened in the state of Illinois.
Does an LLC make the asset fall outside of the very low inheritance threshold for heirs? That's a very good question.
No, because I mean the LLC, the value, let's say you had $1 million property in the LLC and you're the sole member of that LLC. You're the member of an LLC with $1 million value. It doesn't change your asset value for estate planning purposes.
Okay. Well, one question though, on something similar to that, say you have multiple members of the LLC and one of them passes away. How does that impact how they would look at inheritance tax? I know it might be a little bit out of the realm of your scope, but if you have any idea.
So I wasn't going to mention this, but I also own a trust company. So I'm going to leave that aside. So I do know quite a bit about trusts and inheritance and that sort of thing. That's another company that we own. But let's say you had an LLC with 4 members. Each member owned 25%, equal members, and that LLC owned a property worth $1 million, and member 4 dies, well, first of all, you got to consider his estate plan. Did he have a living trust in place, or a will, or an asset protection trust, or something like that? You have to consider what his estate plan was. You also need to consider how your operating agreement was written in the event that you have a member die or exit. I mean, that generally should be discussed at least marginally in the operating agreement itself about what happens in the event of a member leaving the partnership. Basically, at the time of his death, that his 25% member, I mean, you would basically have to do what do you call it? A property evaluation to find out the value of the property. You would have that assessment done. That person owns 25%. The property is worth $1 million. Part of his estate would be a 25% membership interest in an LLC, with his equity being $250,000 value. So that would be factored into his estate plan. But it wouldn't affect the partnership at all unless he didn't have a good estate plan in place. And now you got like 19 grandkids fighting over, one membership interest in an LLC. So that's an excellent reason to have an estate plan in place to avoid infighting within your family when you kick the bucket.
Next question. Are there special mortgage products for non-US citizens who are self-employed? Can you give me some details? For us, if there's a couple ways. We really, being self-employed or being employed for our mortgages really are not a factor if you're using the loan program, which qualifies on the rental income of the property, because you don't have to provide any personal income. If you choose to do the income letter way, then as long as your accountant can verify what your income is, we don't really care. We don't differentiate if somebody is employed or is self-employed. Next question, is now the right time to invest in US real estate? What should we be looking for? This is an excellent question, and we get this a lot. So obviously everybody knows interest rates are higher than what they were during COVID. I think still historically they're still reasonable. But what this has meant is there's a huge portion of property owners that are sitting on mortgages with very low interest rates, and they're just choosing not to sell. And there's also a variety of reasons why there's just an inventory shortage in the US. So there's this demand, but there isn't this demand, at least in my opinion, for owner-occupied borrowers. Meaning that if you're a real estate investor, and most of our sophisticated real estate investors are actually jumping into the market now because they're not competing with other buyers for the same property, and not, artificially driving the property price up just based on multiple people wanting the same property. So it is by far the best time to buy. I think, while interest rates are high, you can always refinance, but you're not always going to be able to get the best purchase. And Casey, I don't know if you have any add to that, but I mean, that's what we're telling everybody. And I think all of our sophisticated investors and seasoned investors are kind of jumping into the market now.
No, I wouldn't consider myself a real estate expert or a real estate economist. So this is not my area of expertise.
Okay, perfect. Currency exchange risk. Can America mortgages help with this? Again, we try to find partners that we vet and make sure that they're well established and work with foreign nationals. So there is a company that's available on our website that will help with not only moving funds over at hopefully the best FX rate, but also if you want to set up mortgage payments using their facility, you can lock in an exchange rate for quite a long period of time. So at least if there's any fluctuation in the country that you're in, you can be fairly consistent about what you're paying every month. Next question. I'm not a US citizen. How do I improve my credit worthiness to get better mortgage terms? Very, very good question. We do not require foreign borrowers to have a US credit score. Our whole business is on foreign nationals and expat lending. So for us, it really wouldn't matter if you're a foreign national and you have US credit. There is a certain threshold that we automatically give you a credit score, which is actually quite decent credit in the US. What are the tax advantages are there for foreign investors in US real estate? I know you're not a tax advisor, Bobby, so I'll just say from our personal experience in dealing with the partners that we have, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bobby, but I believe, especially if you're using an LLC, you have the same tax advantages as a US citizen would have and the same tax benefits or deductions. It's probably one of the only countries in the world where this is available. And I think one of the things that is really important to point out, there is no buyer's stamp duty like they are in most countries. I think New York and California has luxury tax when you purchase a property, but in general, the fact that you're not getting hit with this additional tax or stamp duty just to be able to invest in a country is a fantastic, one of the fantastic benefits of the US.
So tax benefits of investing in property in the US, the real estate tax code, let's say, is really written in favor of incentivizing real estate investors. Like, for example, you can do accelerated depreciation on the internal items. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this from a tax perspective, but if I go buy, I don't know, let's say I buy a commercial property, like an office building, for example, I can go have an assessment done and they can itemize the things inside there, like light fixtures and doorknobs and appliances. And they can create an accelerated depreciation schedule of that allows me to depreciate those individual assets on a faster scale. So in the US, you depreciate commercial property over 39 years, residential over 27. So if you had a commercial property, you would normally, let's say you bought it for $1 million. If you don't do an accelerated depreciation schedule, I'm kind of simplifying here, but you would depreciate that $1 million over 39 years. But if you can go in and find $100,000 worth of appliances and equipment and fixtures and so on and so forth that can be depreciated over 5 years, well, you can depreciate that 100,000 over 5 years, giving you even a tax loss over those first 5 years, creating a huge tax benefit for you over the first 5 years. And then what I know a lot of people do, and I've done this as well, is by the time you kind of burn through your accelerated depreciation schedule and you're getting to the point where you might be tax profitable, you can do a 1031 exchange where you can basically roll the profits of the property forward to another property and basically avoid paying capital gains tax on the sale of that property. So I know a lot of people, and that's a really good strategy for people to do every few years, and you can keep building your asset. I mean, it's not tax free per se, but it's tax deferred. You're basically kicking the can down the road on that capital gains tax, but you can do it indefinitely. And then you can kind of implement that into an estate planning strategy where if you put the property into a properly structured irrevocable trust, then you also avoid, if you just keep rolling the properties forward, you can avoid any estate tax owed on the real estate portfolio itself. So there's huge tax advantages to investing in US properties that really just is not available to or not available in other countries. They just don't have the tax incentives on it like they do in the US.
Yeah, thanks for that, Casey. And I think really, especially global investors, if they're not in the US already, people have a bad I guess impression or expectation of the US taxes, and it's actually just the opposite when you look at most countries.
Yeah, there's a lot of loopholes, but that also means there's a lot of loopholes to take advantage of if you know, you do things the right way and have the right advisors in
Yeah,
place.
I agree. Next question. Can I complete the entire mortgage process while abroad, or do I have to go to the US? Very good question. And no, you do not have to travel to the US. You can do everything from your home country, from the initial application to closing the signing documents. Next question. Does the letter has to show the gross income or net? Another good question. We go off of the gross income. So whatever the taxes are in your home country, all we care about is how much you've made gross for those 2-year period in your current year to date. Next question. So local debt does not matter, only gross. US mortgage payments, 43%. Also, what about the 10%, for example, for the Australian employers to pay on top of the gross, which goes into the retirement fund? I'm familiar with I believe it's the superannuation fund in Australia. For things like that, it really just depends on how your accountant calculates it. Because we're not going off your tax returns, we're going off either a letter from your employer or a letter from your accountant. So that letter is on the gross. Don't believe that they would include anything that would be for future use, because those funds would not be available to you today. But again, it depends on how your employer or your accountant structures a letter. Next question, what is the max loan to value for foreign nationals? It is 75% for a purchase and 70% for a cash out refi. Next question, how does the mortgage loan interest rate look for foreign nationals? I am holding a J1 visa in the US and a visiting professor. Will I be considered a US expat? Very, very good question. So if you're living and working in the US on a proper visa and you have US credit, then certainly you should be able to qualify just as what a US citizen would qualify for. If you are truly a foreign national where you're not living and working in the US, the easiest way to explain it is foreign national rates are about a 1% premium to what a US citizen would pay. And again, I think if you look at it over, the global standard, this is actually very, very good pricing when it comes to foreign national loans. What is the typical mortgage rate? Well, I mean, it's based on a lot of things, based on the loan to value. It's based if you're a US citizen or a foreign national. But again, I would take whatever US citizen rate is, it's about 1% higher than that. What is the optimal entity structure for Canadians to own real estate in the US and not be double taxed in Canada, where an LLC is seen differently than in the US?
That is a great question. I have a lot of Canadian clients, and this is basically an exemption to the rule that we just discussed in the presentation. Canadians have a weird situation because in Canada, the CRA, or the Canadian Revenue Authority, their version of the IRS, the CRA treats a US LLC as a Canadian corporation. So if they had a US LLC, they would have to file it in the US, and then they would have to file a tax return in Canada, treating it like a Canadian corporation. So the workaround to that is I would still buy the property in a US LLC. And then assuming you don't want assuming you don't want the profit to flow back to you in Canada, you want to leave it in the US tax deferred to grow your wealth, which is what most of my Canadian clients that do real estate do. So that's my framework of answering this. What I would do is I would have the property owned by the Wyoming LLC, and then I would create a C Corp, a Wyoming C Corp, as your holding company to own the Wyoming LLC. You will have corporate tax owed at the federal level because there is no corporate tax with a Wyoming C Corp. However, because of the tax benefits that I briefly mentioned and what you'll learn more about next week with the tax expert, I guess he's a CPA, you'll find that generally speaking, especially if you're taking advantage of accelerated depreciation, you're probably not going to have a tax liability anyway. And so because the U.S. corporation is its own taxable entity, you as a Canadian shareholder of a U.S. corporation, you do not have to recognize the profits of that corporation. The profits stop at the corporate level there. Now, If you choose to pay yourself a dividend from that corporation, you will pay Canadian tax on the dividend you distribute out to yourself. But the ownership structure, in my opinion, should be a Wyoming LLC owned by a Canadian C corporation. And then if you have multiple properties, I said Canadian C corporation. I'm sorry, Wyoming C corporation owns Wyoming LLC. If you have multiple properties, you'd have Wyoming LLC 1, LLC 2, 3, 4, so on. And all of them would be owned by Wyoming C corporation.
Okay, thank you, Bobby. Next question. Any recording available after the session? Thanks and greetings from Singapore. Yes. So not only will all of the attendees get a recording, it'll probably take about a week to go through editing, but it'll be available on various channels, on our YouTube, on our website, et cetera, and probably on Bobby's as well. Next question. For mortgages that are qualified based on rental income, do you want to see a person as that LLC partner or more complex nested entities as supported as well? I'm not sure I understand the question 100%, but for us, we want, I mean, a simple LLC is fine for owning the property. We prefer, and actually there are more options to do a mortgage in an LLC than there is to do as an individual. Next question. Does it matter where you have a virtual mailbox?
Okay.
Bobby?
Somebody's been on my website then. Okay. No, not really. It doesn't make a difference. With Business Anywhere, we have, I don't know, a couple of dozen virtual mailbox locations. People have various reasons for wanting them in different places. There could be a reason of having one in a certain location. So it could matter based on your personal situation. Like, for example, let's say you were a California resident and now you want to move to, let's say, Thailand, or maybe you want to be a digital nomad and you want to leave California. Well, from a tax standpoint, California, if you move abroad from California, but you still have connection to California, like you still have a California driver's license, you still have an address, you get mail there, maybe your bank account or your credit card statements or whatever are still addressed to a California address. California is going to consider you a state resident for tax purposes, whether you're physically there or not, just because you have the perception of the connection to California. Whereas at the federal level, you can take advantage of the foreign earned income exclusion or the foreign tax credit. California doesn't care about that. So if you were a California resident wanting to, exit the US and move abroad, ideally what you would want is a virtual mailbox in a zero tax state like South Dakota or Florida or Wyoming or Texas or something like that, so that you could show California that all of those connecting factors, you've exited California for that purpose. So now you have a mailing address, and we'll just use South Dakota as an example. You have a mailing address in South Dakota, your bank statements now go to South Dakota, blah, 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 and you've moved your driver's license, for example, to South Dakota. And voter registration, that's another one they consider. So there could be reasons, but, who knows? That's a pretty generalized question. So hopefully at least I gave a little bit of context for maybe a reason you might want to have it in a particular place. But for the purpose of just getting mail, then no, that doesn't really make a difference.
Thank you, Bobby. Next question. Can the LLC carry different business like property investment, financial trading, or even say design consulting?
Under one entity, can it? Yes. Should you? Never in a million years should you do that. You should never commingle assets with, first of all, you should never, like I mentioned before, you should always separate individual assets into individual LLCs from, at least with real estate, from a liability standpoint, because you have that slip and fall incident, or some idiot decides to build a meth lab in your rental house kitchen. You don't want to aggregate that risk across all of the other assets in that LLC, number one. So from a liability standpoint, it's a bad idea. Number two, you don't want to have, for example, your brokerage account in the same LLC with your real estate investments, because again, you have that liability issue. with every single human being that steps foot on that property. And you have no idea who they're going to be if it's a rental property. Even worse, if it's a commercial property, like you own a strip mall or an apartment building or something like that. Every single person exponentially raises your liability there. And if that LLC gets sued for some litigation event, you have just exposed your liquid asset portfolio, your brokerage account, to that liability. Like personally, I keep my brokerage account in a separate LLC that owns nothing other than my liquid investments. That's it. So I don't even have a liability within that LLC because, I mean, my stocks and bonds don't burn houses down, right? My stocks and bonds don't cause wrongful death, and like I don't have any liability associated with that. But my rental properties do. My rental properties create that problem. And then also from a business standpoint, I would never want to own my operating business in the same entity that has investable assets, because from the same liability perspective, if your business gets sued and you lose that lawsuit and get a judgment, they can go after your brokerage account. That's one reason. From an accounting standpoint, it's you don't want to have combined bookkeeping and accounting for your business with your brokerage account or your rental properties and that sort of thing, for multiple reasons. You might have a really great portfolio that's making great money and now your business is losing money. But if you're combining them into one bookkeeping, it might be a little bit hard to know which one's, making money, which one's losing money. It might give you a false sense of security in your business when maybe the business is the one burning cash. Also, if you plan to sell your business at any point in the future and your buyer is going to come in and want a, generally speaking, 3 to 5 years of accounting records of your business. Well, if you just had your rental property and your brokerage account in the same LLC, they're going to ask you to go restate 3 to 5 years worth of bookkeeping records to get them a clean set of books, because they're not buying your brokerage account or your rental property. So it just creates a mess that you don't really want to see. And for what purpose? To save yourself a couple $100 a year? I mean, it seems like kind of like a silly point to save a couple $100 a year.
I absolutely agree. Next question. Are Wyoming LLCs as beneficial as you have been discussing if I reside in the US?
Yes, 100%. Yep.
Okay. Next question. As a non-US resident, can I transfer the monthly rental income from the LLC bank account to my personal bank account for personal use / investments?
Sure. I mean, that's just a profit distribution. That's just you're making a profit distribution, or you're paying yourself a, air quotes, a salary from the LLC. No problem.
Okay.
That's
Next.
the whole point, right? That's the whole point. We want to get this money. I mean, sure, as a business owner, I like to play the game of business, right? It's like playing Monopoly, but with real money. I like to play the game of business. But I like to go to a steakhouse and eat a Wagyu steak once in a while too, and that costs money.
Okay, this is the final question, and then we will wrap this up. Does America Mortgages place a lien on the property to secure against the mortgage? Yes, absolutely. So any mortgage that you will obtain in the US will have some sort of charge or lien. Normally has to be in first position. So I think that is it. Bobby, thank you very much. Super informative. Really enjoyed your presentation. And again, there is a link in the chat that you can either make an appointment to talk to Bobby or actually even open an LLC directly from that link. Bobby, do you have any last words that you'd like to state before we end?
Yeah, it was a good webinar. Actually, I learned quite a bit from your presentation as well. There's a few things that I know as foreign nationals and expats, getting mortgages for U.S. property can be really difficult. I know if you walk into like Wells Fargo and say, I live abroad, but I want a mortgage in the U.S., I mean, they're going to shoo you out the door. And it seemed like a great product, because I do know also, I think it was you probably know this better than me. It was either 2020 or 2021. There was some legislation change making it much more difficult for self-employed people to get traditional mortgages in the US. Do you know? It was
Yeah,
March of 2020 or 21.
yeah, I don't specifically, but again, because of the way that we qualify the mortgages, for us, if
Yeah,
you're buying an investment property, it doesn't matter, you know.
yeah, that was my point. So you make it much easier now than getting a traditional mortgage. And I've gone the investor mortgage route before too, and paying 100 basis points over the standard rate, and it's worth it. It's so,
Absolutely.
so
So,
so anyway, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
yeah, I appreciate it. And again, everybody will receive a copy of this entire webinar in the mailbox it'll probably take about a week. Next Thursday, Tax Smart Strategies with Thomas Carden, who is our tax partner. Thursday, 6:30, June 13th, 6:30 p.m. Singapore time. We look forward to seeing everybody there. There is a link that you can sign up on this in the chat. Thank you again, Bobby, and thank you everybody for attending wherever you may be, and we look forward to working with you. Thanks, Bobby.
Take care.